So, Kevin, it's lovely to have you here at the Cambridge Film Festival with How I Live Now. And what was the appeal of adapting Meg Roscoff's novel for the big screen?
I just really thought it was a beautiful book and very unusual. And I think there's so many interesting things going on in young adult fiction. I think it's more vibrant, more experimental, more interesting than what's going on in adult fiction, actually. And I read it just out of interest. Somebody gave it to me, said, "This is a great book." And I read it and I thought would make a beautiful film. And it's quite, as a book, it appealed to adults and to teenagers. And I wanted to make a film that did both of those things as well.
Now, of course, Saoirse Ronan's in the lead role of Daisy, but you were actually originally looking for an unknown American actress, weren't you? So how did Saoirse come on board then?
Well, yeah, I always saw this as being a very small film with no stars. I wanted it to be unknowns, actually, and I thought I'm going to find a lovely young boy in the English countryside somewhere who's going to play the leading male role, and I'm going to get an unknown teenage American girl. And I spent, with my casting director, several months in America looking for a teenage girl who would be correct for it. And I met a lot of the famous actresses, the young, in their teenage years, and I met literally hundreds and thousands of just unknown professionals, and I couldn't find anybody I liked. And then somebody said, "Oh, Saoirse Ronan, is interested in reading for it," and I said, "I don't really want Saoirse because she's wonderful, but I want an unknown." It's sort of, and then after about 6 months of looking, I thought, well, maybe I'll just see what she's like. And she came in and she read, and she hadn't prepared the lines even because she hadn't got the email or something mixed up. And she came and she read them once, and she had us all in tears, and she was so wonderful. So I was like, what have I been doing? Why have I been wasting my time? She's an absolutely brilliant actor.
And George as well, George MacKay, who you've got in the male lead for the role. How did he come on board?
Again, it was similarly difficult. I had the casting director going out to schools all over Britain for months and months, and I think I saw a tape of George very early on, and I thought, well, he's too old, because at that stage I thought that the character playing Daisy, the actress playing Daisy, would be younger, and so I thought, oh, he's too old. But then, as often happens, once I then cast one, then he became appropriate. And actually, I read Saoirse with 5 boys, and he was one of them. And obviously part of it is that they have to be attracted to each other, and if at least find something theoretically of interest. And so it was obvious from the reading between the two of them that I quite like him. Yeah, it's quite nice. I thought,
Well, it definitely works on screen. Though you can definitely see that chemistry between the two of them. It's actually quite a grown-up role compared to what Saoirse did in the past, isn't it? In terms of it's her first on-screen love scene as well. We've got in there. Is that kind of a responsibility then as a director, leading a young actress into that kind of part and through that role?
Well, I think she doesn't need much guiding from me. She's such a really wonderful, brilliantly talented actor. But it is a different role than people have seen her in before. I think she's often played either children or kind of as in Hannah, she plays a child who is a sort of feral creature, but who has a sort of a simplicity and a sense of grace to her. Whereas this character is quite a prickly, difficult teenager trying to find their way in life, and she's pretty tough. So my one direction I was always giving her all the way through shooting was, be tougher, be more of a bitch, go on, because she's naturally such a sweet, gentle, silly person.
It got me many directors out there telling their lead actresses, be more of a bitch. Now, it's a film that's in a way a film of two halves, isn't it? It's quite distinct. How did you find addressing that challenge as a director? Because it means you've got lots of different tones in there, doesn't it?
Well, what I set out to do, and I don't know if I've achieved it, but audiences have to judge, is I wanted to make a film where you think you're going in one direction, you think you're watching one kind of film for the first 40 minutes, and then it turns dramatically into something else, because that was the experience for me of reading the book. But also I wanted to play in a very sort of filmic way with expectations of genre. So when you start the film, it's quite light in tone, quite comedic even, and it feels like it fits into a kind of familiar teen film kind of world of a difficult, troubled girl who comes to the English countryside and is going to be in some way cured by love, cured of her troubles. And so I want to lull the audience into a sort of full sense of security. And then whip the carpet out from under their feet. That was the idea.
And in terms of the look as well, you've got director of photography Franz Lustig on board this time, haven't you? How was it working with him and getting that feel in terms of how the film looked as well?
He was wonderful. I met him doing a commercial, which I very occasionally do, and I was telling him about this script I was developing, I wanted to do, and he was so responded to it. He's such a he's German, and he's sort of a particular kind of German hippie, I'd call him. He's very sensitive and nature-loving, and yet combined with some German efficiency, which is very useful in a cameraman. But he responded so strongly to the world of the film, and I sent him to read, and so I thought, well, he's the man, and I really wanted somebody who was going to capture a sense of the British countryside, because in some ways it's a film about, well, I say about England, we filmed it mostly in Wales actually, but it is sort of about England and about English sense of the folklore and sort of folk music and the kind of the magic of the English countryside, and the English countryside plays a sort of very strong part in it.
And you're filming something completely different at the moment, aren't you, from How I Live Now, Black Sea with Jude Law. How are things going?
Well, they were going well till last week. We were in our last week of principal photography, and we had a couple of weeks at the end in a tank at Pinewood Studios. We were filming underwater sequences with 3 actors walking across the seabed and various things. And it's a submarine film, I should explain. And we put something into the tank that turned all the water bright yellow.
Oh gosh!
On Monday. So we then put another chemical. We needed a couple of Cambridge chemistry graduates, because we obviously didn't know what we were doing. We put something else into the water that night that turned it green the next day. And then we added something else, and it became just a sort of milky soup. So we had to call off filming, actually. So we're now, I'm just waiting now to sort of organise again to finish the last week of the film, which is a strange thing. I sort of finished unexpectedly, and now I'm a little on tenterhooks, hoping the insurance money comes through.
The challenges of filming with water, hey? Normally say it's things like children and animals that cause problems.
No, everything is true, but what they say about water.
And of course, you've also got, we've heard recently you signed up for Last Train to Memphis as well, which is I'm very excited to hear as an Elvis fan. Are you a fan of Elvis's music too?
I am a fan of Elvis, but I'm as much as that. I'm fascinated to attempt to. I mean, it's very early days. We haven't got a script yet that we really like, and I haven't got an Elvis, which is probably even harder. But in some ways, to deconstruct the image, the legend, and it was something I very much enjoyed. A film I made a couple of years ago called Marley, about Bob Marley, and I'm trying to bring some of the sort of investigative impulse, I suppose, that came into that documentary into this feature film. As I say, it's early days.
Yeah, I was going to say actually about Marley, because it seemed a kind of a nice and interesting progression from the documentary looking behind that myth to going behind the myth of Elvis, I guess. I mean, it's for the early years it's based, isn't it? Will it go up to when he meets Priscilla, do you think, or are you staying quite early on in the Sun years?
No, it's very early on. It's sort of Elvis before he's Elvis, or is Elvis becoming Elvis, I suppose. It's kind of up until his last. Well, sorry, I don't really know yet, but I think it's up until his signing with RCA and going with Colonel Tom Parker, his notorious, famous manager, and that really is the last act of the film. So it finishes in 1957.
It's hard, I guess. I mean, you did it with Marley so well, but it's hard to guess to go behind these people who are so well known. People have such an idea of what they're like already. How do you feel about that as a director, getting behind what someone's really like and changing people's maybe, or giving them a different perspective on them at least?
Well, it's hard not to make a biopic that is a cliche, and that's what you want to avoid. And Elvis is obviously such a familiar figure, one of the most familiar figures in the world, but he's also a figure of fun these days, and so you have to somehow really subvert expectations, and that's what I want to try and do. How
hard do you think it's going to be to search for an actor? Because I've seen there's a young actors website as well where people can upload their Elvis auditions, as it were.
Yeah. Well, that's again something that's very open at the moment. Open to at the moment. You can obviously go two ways. You can go with somebody who looks like Elvis, which I suspect is probably not so good, or you can go with someone who's just a great actor who's going to reveal something truthful about who he was.
And have you looked back at all at John Carpenter's Elvis film with Kurt Russell, or is it early days for that yet?
No, I have looked at that, and actually it's very entertaining. I think it's funny, there's been several TV movies, and there was a TV series in America a few years ago about Elvis, but there's never been a movie, and which is strange when there's been movies about almost everybody. And I think one of the reasons for that is that it's so hard to grapple with the mythology. So yeah, as I say, it's early days. We're not filming anytime soon. So hopefully I can find a way into it.
I'm sure you will do. It's been lovely talking to you, Kevin. Really enjoyed How I Live Now, and good luck for when that comes out in October.
Thank you very much.